Welcome back to Wordy Wednesday. Well, we've had a lot of fun with idioms lately, and I thought today we would take a look at some special idioms. These are idioms that have evolved to become words in their own right, to the point where we no longer recognize that they are idioms. They are words, they have definitions, and they have replaced the original concept they were used to clarify. So, when we come back. So let's start with a great one, because it's an old one. Eavesdrop. We all know what it means. It's to surreptitiously listen to someone's conversation. We do this electronically with wiretapping. Well, it wasn't always done that way. In the Middle Ages, if you wanted to listen in on somebody's conversation, you had to creep up, outside their house and listen at the door or the window. Well, the word eavesdropper, and this is an idiom, or it was an idiom, it's a word now. When drops of rain fell off the eaves of a building, those drops of rain were called eavesdroppers. They were not called eavesdrops, eavesdroppers, because they dropped off the eaves. And that idiomatically, and if you'll recall, idioms are taking a commonly understood concept and applying it to another concept in order to explain or clarify it. Something that we already understand, already resonates with us, bring it over somewhere else to shed light on something new. So we get eavesdrop, that's our eavesdroppers, rather, our little drops of water. The person who listens at the window under the eaves where the eavesdroppers fall is an eavesdropper. We then backformed eavesdrop from eavesdropper. That word had not existed prior to that. It was eavesdroppers. The droplets were not called drops, they were called droppers. But we just sort of reverse engineered it, or backformed, as linguists would say, to come up with a verb to go with our newly created idiomatic noun. And from there, of course, if you can eavesdrop, you used to eavesdropped, and you are eavesdropping. And so we just ran with it and created a verb from the noun and gave it its past and its past participle and so on, as we do with all kinds of things. But of course now, eavesdrop, which is new, has nothing to do with the rain, nothing to do with the eaves. The definition is listening surreptitiously. Now, we backform. This is what we do. And let me give you an example of backforming that you probably never thought about, but it might explain something you might have thought about. The person who begs is a beggar, right? But it's not B-E-G-G-E-R. As in, for example, fisher is the one who fishes, crier is the one who cries, and let's face it, medieval people had fishers and they had town criers. No. The reason for this is beggar was in our vocabulary before beg. Beggar meant to request, to supplicate. So one would beggar, and the person who supplicated was a beggar, and we backformed beg on that because it made sense to us. If a fisher is one who fished, then a beggar is one who begs, right? Back formation. And we still have beggar as a verb. It's a transitive verb. And it's like beggar's belief or beggars the imagination. And in that context, the meaning is it has exhausted the resources, turned belief into a beggar, so to speak. So it defies belief. So we still have that. But in general, when we have a noun coming from a verb, in other words, to fish, and we want to say one who fishes, we do that with an ER. There are some cases where we don't. For example, liar, as in liar, liar, pants on fire, the person who prevaricates and doesn't tell the truth. But if we use the word lie in its other meaning, which means to lay, to place, we use an E. So, for example, an outlier, that might be a farm that lies outside of a village. Outlier, it's with an E. Remember, older words are more resistant, well, not older common words, commonly used words, are more resistant to change. So a word like beggar, which was very commonly used, is more resistant to change. Will it eventually become beggar, B-E-G-G-E-R? I don't know. Maybe not. And I would say maybe not because of that hard G, soft G thing. We might resist that because looking at B-E-G-G-E-R, we might be inclined to say beggar. So who knows? Anyway, it's all a digression off eavesdrop. Shanghai. Well, when it's got a capital S, Shanghai is a city in China. But when we turn this into a verb, and here's where the idiom comes in, the verb has nothing to do with China any longer. When you Shanghai someone, it's because you have abducted them and forced them to go somewhere they don't want to go, for example. And this word was a 19th century word, and it comes from an unfortunate and totally illegal custom of kidnapping people. The British actually legislated this. It was called impressment. They were allowed to do it. They tried to do it to us. We fought the War of 1812 over it. They would take people and sort of grab them and stick them on ships and force them to become sailors. And in the United States, especially on the West Coast, people would be drugged and smuggled aboard ships. They'd wake up several hours later out to sea on their way to the port of Shanghai, which was a major center for the opium trade. So now when we say somebody got shanghaied, we don't even understand the connection to China. Shanghai has its own meaning. So it's an idiom that has, in fact, become a word. So, and as I say, the British and impressment, that was like a legal thing. They could, it wasn't a crime. You could actually do that in England. Just the Royal Navy could just wander the streets, grabbing people up and force them into the Navy. The issue in the War of 1812 was when they would do that to American citizens who were very popular. They would often take American sailors who already knew how to sail and already knew how to speak English. And we didn't like that very much. So we fought a war. You would have thought they would have learned from the last war, but nope. So I don't think they're going to be doing that again anytime soon. A related concept to Shanghai is hijack. The fact that they both have that high syllable is just coincidental. Hijack, and we know that means to steal somebody's cargo or their transport vehicle. Hijack. This one comes from America in the Prohibition days, and it's said, and I don't know how accurate this is. This is one of those stories that you kind of say, are you sure? Well, here's the story. That in Prohibition days, when the various criminals who were illegally trafficking liquor would drive past in their trucks full of illegal liquor, they'd pass each other. They'd wave to each other and say, hijack, just, as in hi, John, to put the other driver at their ease. John and Jack being the most common names out there. And if the driver, even if his name wasn't Jack, he might not think anything of it. And that's where it allegedly came from. So that if you said hijack to someone, it meant you were stealing their cargo. The idiom almost immediately became its own separate word. So there we have hijack. And today, no one is saying, well, it means hello, John. Nightmare. This is one that is not quite as obscure, mostly because people have become aware, because, it's a fun story, about the origins of the word. Now, nightmare is a bad dream. This is another very old one, and a nightmare was a mythical succubus, a demon that allegedly came and had relations with you while you were sleeping. Nightmare then became a bad dream, so it started off as an idiom for a bad experience while you were sleeping. Eventually, of course, became like a bad dream. We think of that, which is an idiom. We think of that as the origin of the further extension of that idiom, which we now have is, well, that meeting was just a nightmare. So we have one idiom that became so firmly entrenched, it became its own word that we are now turning in to an idiom for yet more things. So I like that one for that reason. Ha-ha. Ha-ha is not a word that we are really familiar with in the U.S., although in the UK, they know all about it. So here's what a ha-ha is. When you have a garden, now remember, you are a grand lord and you have a great estate. You have a garden and you need to wall off your garden so the peasantry doesn't come in and sully your pristine lawn. But you're a lord, so you don't want your precious view interrupted. So your garden comes along like this and you drop a wall. You excavate out and then bring it up to a gradual incline so that here's your garden wall, you're up here, garden wall drops, And the peasants who are over here somewhere can't get into your garden. But meanwhile, your garden view is not disturbed. You go right to the edge of your garden and look out onto your woods or whatever else it is that you want to look onto. We recently discussed that. The Prince of Wales owns the entire Duchy of Cornwall, just like I own this sweater. Unbelievable. So, haha. It got its name from a cry, ha or hey, as you approach that wall. It's a warning cry. Take one more step and you're going to fall down. And those walls were often 10, 12 feet drops because, they needed to keep the peasantry out. And, your average peasant wasn't going to climb up 8 or 10 feet to get into your garden, or maybe they were. Apparently people thought they might, hence the walls. But ha-ha was a cry of warning, and the ha-ha is a drop. So now the word ha-ha specifically means that wall, and it's lost the connection to the warning cry. Lumber. Oh, lumber is a good one. It's a very old one. In fact, it's probably the oldest one we are going to discuss today. Lumber comes from long beard. So how does this happen? Well, the Romans had a very large empire that spread into Europe, into the area we now know as Germany. And there were tribes, German Teutonic tribes, in the area that the Romans fought. And they had long beards. The Romans were clean shaven. They didn't like facial hair. So the Teutonic peoples had long beards. And they made some incursions, including into the area of Lombardy, which got its name from the Longobardi, which meant long beard. So, and by the way, this is a long circuitous pathway. The people who settled in Lombardy, remember they started off as Teutonic tribes people with long beards, became known as Lombards. In the Middle Ages, Lombardy became known as a banking region that was, they were a very mercantile people. They did banking, they were merchants, and then the Lombards moved into areas outside of Lombardy. So you would have the Lombard area in London, or there's also a Lombard Street in Paris, where the banking houses moved in. And at one time, the Lombard region in London was known for its pawnbrokers because in addition to banking, they did all kinds of lending, and pawnbrokering was a legitimate form of lending money with goods left as collateral. So they would have pawnbrokerages in this Lombard area in London, and the pawnbrokerages would have acquired a large amount of stuff. Weird, useless stuff, the kind of things that people would bring in and ask for a loan against, and the pawnbroker, if he was not paid back, would have acquired the goods. Eventually, they just had warehouses full of the stuff. And the stuff was called Lombard from the pawnbrokerages, which were called Lombards as well. So from Lombard, we ended up with lumber, which is a pile of miscellaneous stuff. And from pile of miscellaneous stuff, we eventually got lumber, which is a pile of wood. So we are so far removed from the idioms, which is the Lombard people, which gave their names to variously the Lombardy region, pawnbrokerages, and this cache of stuff that a pawn brokerage would have acquired, all as idioms, until eventually that idiom, lumber, came to have its own meaning. And while we are talking about Teutonic tribes, another little digression, if you look up the word vandal in a dictionary, you know what you're going to find. That's a person who defaces other people's property. But vandal comes from another one of the Teutonic tribes. The Romans happened to find the tribe of Vandals to be particularly destructive. So idiomatically, you have a person who destroys someone else's property, and he's a vandal. Now, vandal has become so far removed, because this is 1,500 years ago, has become so far removed from the original Teutonic tribes that we don't even think of the connection anymore. For us, vandal is a destroyer of property because the idiomatic meaning is the one that stuck with us. So let's see, how about we do one more? Prestige. Now, prestige is admiration and respect. But if I explain to you where it comes from, you're going to see the connection immediately. The root of the word is prestidigitation, which is a fancy word for magic tricks. It used to be juggling mostly, it's sleight of hand. And eventually, as an idiom, sleight of hand became applied to well-known characters, important figures in government or society who had a great deal of respect. And it was considered that they acquired this respect through trickery. So now prestige just means the respect. We've lost the trickery and the deception. When you say that's a very prestigious politician, you don't think back to, oh yeah, and he probably pulled the wool over somebody's eyes to get there. So this is another example of the idiom having created its own little meaning, so that we've lost sight of the fact that at one time it was an idiom. At one time we were using magic tricks as an explanation for politics or other fame that would have come to public figures. So let's see, do we have time for another one? All right, we do. I'm not quite there yet. So we have, I'm not going to go over long, but we can do another one. Let's do chairman. Chairman. This is also an idiom. Now, the chair man is the man who sits in the chair. Now, we can sort of gather that intuitively, but at one time, it was dealing with the fact that the Lord or the judge or the presiding person, whatever he may be. Oh, and this was feminized. By the 17th century, they had records of chair women as well. So it got feminized pretty quickly. The chief person in any area would sit up on a dais in a high chair, and they would be the occupier of the chair. Therefore, the chairman was the person who chaired the meeting or the group, because we took the idiom of occupying the chair to go over to mean running the meeting. And so that too started as an idiom. And now we can drop the man portion, and we have this link. When you drop the man portion from chairman and just say, John chaired the meeting, we lose the connection. And by the way, with feminism and the need to make the concept of chairperson non-gender specific, as time goes by, we will lose that connection more and more. Our grandchildren will be scratching their heads to figure this connection out. So the chairman who occupied the chair, now we have the connection between the chair over here as symbolic of running the meeting. So we have a lot of these words that, as I say, once were clear as idioms, now are very much words all unto themselves. So I hope this has been entertaining for you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Book Club. Meantime, have a terrific day.